Pull up a chair, friend. I've been holding on to this one for you. This is a story about a boy from a split-level house in Oceanside, New York. Working-class town, nothing fancy. One day, this same boy would stand in Shanghai in front of millions of people and the president of China himself and cut the ribbon on a $6 billion Disneyland. $6 billion with a B! 963 acres, 11 times the size of the original park. And the man holding those scissors? The same kid who used to scrape gum off the bottom of school desks for pocket money. His name is Bob Iger, and he wrote this whole thing down in a book called The Ride of a Lifetime. Let me tell you something. That title is not a marketing pitch. That is a description. I'm not here to tell you what happened to Bob. You can Google that. I'm here to tell you how it happened. Because the how is the whole lesson. Bob grew up in a house where you never knew which dad was walking through the door. His father was a brilliant man, but a troubled one, in and out of advertising jobs. Lost one job because he was bound and determined to go march on Washington and hear Dr. King speak. Young Bob could tell by the sound of the footsteps up the stairs whether it was happy dad coming home that night or sad dad. But that daddy of his made him read. Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Faulkner, every book in the den, Bob devoured them. And he made Bob work. 8th grade, shoveling snow. 15 years old, summer janitor, cleaning gum off the bottom of 1,000 school desks. Builds character, Bob says, or at least a tolerance for monotony. Every dime Bob earned was his own. And every morning, he was up at 4:15. Still is, to this day. While the rest of the world is sleeping, Bob Iger is reading, thinking, moving. His dream at 15? He wanted to be a network news anchorman. So he got through Ithaca College, made pizza at Pizza Hut on the weekends, and landed a job at a tiny cable station in Ithaca doing the weather. 6 months of bleak upstate New York snow reports later, he figured out 2 things. 1, he was, by his own admission, mediocre at it. And 2, the dream was dead. Time to find a new one.
Now, here is where you have to believe me, friend, because I could not make this up. Bob's uncle had eye surgery in a Manhattan hospital. His roommate in that hospital room was some little ABC executive pretending to be a big shot. Bob's uncle thought he was somebody important. Mentioned his nephew looking for TV work. And just like that, Bob walks in at $150 a week, studio supervisor, the lowest rung on the ABC ladder. He cleaned up after soap operas, let the lighting crew in at 4:30 in the morning, knew every carpenter, every electrician, every makeup artist on the lot. Then one day, Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board himself. Big concert at Madison Square Garden, 1974. Somebody hollers at young Bob to run out and buy a bottle of Listerine and rush it to Sinatra's dressing room. Bob ran, knocked. A bodyguard answered, and deep from the back of the room, that voice, "Let him in." Sinatra handed that 23-year-old kid a crisp $100 bill and a gold lighter inscribed, "Love, Sinatra." Bob spent the $100, but that lighter sits in his desk to this day. But here's the twist. His boss at ABC was crooked, using company budgets for his own mistress apartment, that kind of thing. And Bob wouldn't play along. So one day the boss calls him in, stares him down, and says, "Iger, you're no longer promotable. 2 weeks to find another job or you're done." 23 years old. Career over, he thought. Walked over to the ABC job board, a clipboard hanging on a wall. And there it was, an opening at ABC Sports. And that is where he met the man who would build him. Roone Arledge, legend of legends. The man who invented televised sports as we know it. Slow-motion replays, reverse angles, live satellite, all Roone. And he had one rule burned into every soul who worked for him. Do what you need to do to make it better. One morning, Bob's standing next to Roone at the urinal. He says, "Roone, Some days it feels like I can barely keep my head above water. Roone doesn't even look at him, just says, "Get a longer snorkel." Zips up, walks out. That's Roone. Another time, Roone decides ABC should cover the World Table Tennis Championships in Pyongyang, North Korea, 1979. Bob says, "Roone, that's illegal. US sanctions." Roone says, "Find another way." And by God, Bob flies to Wales, then to Beijing, works around the sanctions, and gets ABC cameras into North Korea. First American crew in decades. But the real lesson came at a Monday morning meeting. Bob had missed the rights to Sebastian Coe setting the world mile record in Oslo. Roone walks in furious, wants to know who screwed up. 24 people around that table. Bob, sitting against the wall with the backbenchers, raises his hand. "It was my mistake." Dead silence. After the meeting, people come up to him. "I can't believe you did that." "Did what?" "Admitted it was your fault." From that day forward, Roone treated him differently. 2 lessons, Bob says, from that one moment. Own your mistakes and be decent to people. Excellence and fairness don't have to be enemies.
Now hang on. Fast forward 20 years. Cap Cities, a scrappy little company, buys ABC. They call it the minnow that ate the whale. And 10 years after that, Disney buys Cap Cities. So Bob Iger, the weatherman from Ithaca, suddenly works for the Walt Disney Company. He climbs all the way up to Chief Operating Officer. Number 2 to Michael Eisner. But by the early 2000s, the whole operation was bleeding. Disney Animation hadn't had a real hit in years. Pixar, their golden partner, had gone to war with them. Steve Jobs told the press in January of 2004 he would never deal with Disney again. Then Comcast launched a hostile takeover bid, $64 billion. Then Roy Disney himself led a shareholder revolt, called it Save Disney. 43% of the shareholders voted no confidence. The board went looking for someone new. Bob was the only inside candidate, and half the board didn't want him. So Bob hires a political consultant, a man named Scott Miller, who hands him a playbook and says, "This is a campaign." And he gives Bob one rule. You can't win on the defense. It's only about the future, not about the past. He also told him, pick 3 priorities. 3, not 5, not 7. Because anything more, nobody remembers. October 3rd, 2005. Bob Iger becomes the 6th CEO of the Walt Disney Company. Weeks before that, Bob had been standing on Main Street in Hong Kong Disneyland, watching the opening parade of a brand new Disney park. Float after float, Snow White, Cinderella, Lion King. And Bob turns to his team and says, "Do you notice something? There are barely any Disney characters from the last 10 years. The characters people love now were all Pixar characters." So, at his very first board meeting as CEO, Bob drops the bomb. "I think we should buy Pixar." People thought he had lost his mind. His wife Willow said Steve Jobs would never sell. But Bob picked up the phone anyway, called Steve, asked him straight up, "What do you think about Disney buying Pixar?" The silence on the line was so long, Bob was sure he was about to be laughed off the phone. Steve said, "You know, that's not the craziest idea in the world." They met at Apple's headquarters. Steve walks up to a 25-foot whiteboard, writes pros on one side, cons on the other. 2 hours later, the cons were everywhere. Disney's culture will destroy Pixar. Wall Street will hate it. Pixar will reject Disney like a body rejects a donated organ. The pros? A handful. Bob felt sick. Said, "Well, it was a nice idea." Steve looked at him and, slow, deliberate, said, A few solid pros are more powerful than dozens of cons. $7.4 billion later, Disney owned Pixar. And then came Marvel. And then came Lucasfilm. Star Wars. The ride wasn't even close to over.
Which brings us back to Shanghai, June 2016. Bob is standing in a park that took 18 years and $6 billion to build. He's been on the project since day one. Met 3 presidents of China, 5 mayors of Shanghai, 2 weeks of adrenaline. Opening day is Thursday. Wednesday morning, he's leading a VIP tour. George Lucas is there. His own family is there. His head of parks pulls him aside and whispers, "There's been an alligator attack in Orlando. A 2-year-old boy." Bob keeps smiling through the rest of the tour, but his heart is on the other side of the world. Thursday morning, 4 a.m. He dials a number in Florida. The boy's father picks up, a man named Matt Graves. And through heaving sobs, Matt says to him, "Promise me my son's life won't be in vain. Promise me you'll do whatever you can to prevent this from ever happening to another child." Bob gave him his promise. 45 years in the business, and he sat on the edge of a Shanghai hotel bed and cried so hard, both of his contact lenses fell out. In the next 24 hours, Disney put ropes and fences and warning signs around every single lagoon on a property twice the size of Manhattan. And Bob put his suit on, walked out, and cut that ribbon on Shanghai Disneyland in front of the whole world. Because that is what leadership is, friend. It is doing the sacred and the crushing thing in the same breath. It is carrying the happiest day of your career and the saddest day of your career in the same pocket. Bob Iger worked for the same company for 45 years. 20 jobs, 14 bosses, and in the ride of a lifetime, he pulls out 10 principles from all of it. Optimism, courage, focus, decisiveness, curiosity, fairness, thoughtfulness, authenticity, the relentless pursuit of perfection and integrity. But between you and me, the secret was simpler than any list of 10. It was the kid cleaning gum off the desks. The young man who got a lesson from a mentor who would not accept good enough. The backbencher who owned his mistake in front of 24 people. The leader who, on the saddest morning of his life, still picked up the phone and called a grieving father because it was the right thing to do. Let me ask you something. When it's your hardest day, are you going to hide behind a statement, or are you going to pick up the phone yourself? You think about that and drop me a comment. Tell me what you'd do. I want to hear it. And listen, I barely scratched the surface today. I told you about Pixar, but I didn't tell you how Bob walked into a meeting with an old-school comic book legend named Ike Perlmutter and came out owning Marvel, every superhero you've ever loved. I didn't tell you how he drove up to George Lucas's ranch in California and came home with the keys to Star Wars. I didn't tell you about Disney Plus, or the billion-dollar bets he made when the whole industry said he was crazy. All of that, every deal, every late-night phone call, every time he thought the whole thing might come crashing down, it's all in the book. So if this story moved you even a little, tap that thumbs up, hit subscribe so we can keep meeting here by the fire. And go get yourself a copy of The Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger. Read it slow, friend. Read it twice. Because the way he did it is the way you can, too. Good night, and get a longer snorkel.